It's your turn, ladies and gentlemen. I have lots more questions, but time is just, because isn't it lovely when you talk to writers who really know how to talk, you know? It's just really something. I can just sit here and then let it happen, but
a light way of saying never shuts up. Or good on radio, as they say.
And now it's your turn.
Hi, Emma. Thank you. I really enjoyed the interview, and thanks to Susan. I was just going to ask you about choosing Jack as your main narrator, because that's such a brave and unique choice. It can be very refreshing, but it can also be very limiting. Did you try writing the story from different point of views before you decided on this? And my other question was about the difference between writing short stories and novels, because I have written short stories. I'm struggling with a novel. I'd like to hear more about your experience about the difference between the two. Thank you.
Sure. To answer the first question, the reason I chose Jack as the narrator for Room is that my whole idea for Room was, what would a 5-year-old boy have to say if he emerged into our world for the first time? It's a classic kind of device. It's like what they call Martian poetry, poems written from the point of view of somebody who's literally new to this earth. So he was my idea. So no, I never tried a single line from the point of view of anybody else. And although readers have actually asked me to, many people have written to say, tell the story from Ma's point of view or from a psychologist's point of view. I say no, that would be tedious or miserable. I mean, in the case of Ma, it would be 7 years of misery. So Jack's point of view was the only one I even considered. And yes, I had never written from a child's point of view before, but I just felt that it would provide exactly the right amount of humor and innocence and strangeness to take us through such a dark story, a story I wouldn't have wanted to tell in any other way, you know. As for your question about short stories versus novels, short stories, I think, are often a writer's almost favorite genre because we're working on each short story for a while, so it's a satisfyingly long relationship. It's not, you know, gone in a blink, but they don't take up absolutely years of our lives, whereas novels, you know, they really are marriages as opposed to romantic affairs, you know. They all have their longers and their moments where you think, why did I get into this? How can I get out? And they nearly always take longer than you thought, and, you know, often feel a little bit dog-eared by the time you're finally sending it off to the publishers. So I love both, and it's not that I prefer one over the other, because to me it depends on the story. Some stories I come across are longing to become novels, and some want to be short stories, and some of them want to be radio plays, and some of them want to be stage plays. So I try and just pay attention to what the story needs. Next question.
You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but I have a family connection with London, Ontario from the past, and I think of London, Ontario as a very parochial, conservative place, and despite superficial changes, I'm sure it's still like that. Do you find the people in London, Ontario fertile ground, might you say, for ideas about what to write about? Or do you just find the place stultifying?
I'm always surprised when people warn me that London, Ontario is conservative, you know, when I first moved there. Because conservative to me means scary lynch mobs shouting, out queer, you know. So by those standards, London, Ontario is an idyllic place to live. My kids are growing up with no idea that having two mothers is a problem, you know. Our neighbour is completely unfazed by a two-mother family. So I find it a fantastic place to live in that sense. And as for the you know, small c conservative side of things, it doesn't bother me because I get to travel a lot, right? If I was there every day of every year, it might bother me. But yes, I find, you know, once you get to know people, I find it just as interesting a source of human passions as anywhere else. You know, you just have to dig a little deeper before people lay their griefs and their passions on you. Whereas in Dublin, you'd probably get it over the first drink.
Next question, please. Oh, just before we go on, Tina, were you including the signing in our time frame? No. Splendid, thank you. Thank you. Please.
I just finished reading Onward in The Atlantic, and I'm wondering whether you find that publishing your work in this kind of a magazine venue increases the sale of your books or not.
I don't know, because I have so little experience publishing my short stories in venues like the Atlantic. My experience is you can have 10 books under your belt, and still, if you send an unsolicited story to a magazine, odds are it'll get bounced back without so much as a note. So mostly when I write short stories, I hold on to them and I wait for somebody to ask me for a short story, say for an anthology or something very specific. In the case of Astray, quite a few magazines took stories, I think, at the publisher's suggestion, so it was as part of the publishers getting the book published. So I don't find it easy to make these publications at all, and so I don't really know whether it helps. I assume it does. And it's always nice to, in a way, put stories out in different venues and you know, have people then be attracted to the collection. But no, I don't know what the results are.
Maybe some people who by some chance don't even like that story.
Indeed, whereas they might have liked others, yes. Mm-hmm. It's funny, the Onward story you mentioned, there's a benefactor gentleman mentioned in that story who's helping somebody move to Canada. And even though the reason I came across this case at all was because of the fame of the benefactor, I found that I couldn't mention his name in the story because it was just too distracting. It was sort of a looming famous name. So in that case, I actually had to leave his name out and only mention it in the notes. So that's a paradox about, you know, using the element of truth, which is that, you know, sometimes that the truth bit actually, you know, becomes slightly obtrusive and you have to try and keep the truth at bay. I can never quite answer for myself, to my satisfaction, the question of why the truth elements should matter at all. I mean, when you can write fantastic historical fiction just by making it all up, like, say, Sarah Waters, what is it that makes some of us, like, say, Hilary Mantel, you know, drawn to the facts? Why would we bother struggling with the facts at all? But the facts somehow do have a mysterious charm, you know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Look, they're forming a queue.
Love the queue, don't you? I know.
I guess I'm curious about what are you working on now? What's kind of rolling around in your creative subconscious?
I'm so glad you asked. Right now I'm writing a murder mystery about murder in 1870s San Francisco. So in a way it's my historical stuff, but it is new in that it's an actual whodunit as well. So that's the technical challenge for me. I suppose one thing I learned from Room is that it's really, really satisfying if you write a story that will keep your readers in suspense. So I want to do a bit more of that, even though it's not like Room in other ways. And I would say future projects, I've got some contemporary ones in mind and some historical ones. So I think I will continue to go between the two. But the San Francisco one it's all set among lowlifes in San Francisco, basically French-speaking lowlifes, and it's a real historical incident. And again, I'm working on, you know, newspaper records of what was said in court, which are wonderful sources because they're utterly messy. People's names are given differently in different versions. People get muddled about the facts. Everybody always sounds like they're lying in court testimony, I find. There's, you know, huge, great gaps and inconsistencies, so there's a huge amount of room for fiction. And for that novel, I've actually been using a lot of online sources that I've never used before, like online genealogical databases. And you know, they're like this little private world. You know, you're peering through ships' passenger lists and you're looking at, you know, these databases are usually based on scans of very blurry 19th century handwriting. So, you know, they're absolutely full of mistakes. So they're a very messy but very stimulating source.
Next question, please.
Look, we're even hanging back a bit so as not to crowd each other at an ATM, you know? Lovely.
All the blondes are coming up to attack. So I just wanted to say that I had a question sort of about Room. When I first read that you had used Jack's perspective, I knew that I was reading something amazing. But then when I read halfway through that you showed them getting out of the room and what their lives were like after that, you were sort of one of a kind in my mind, because I read a lot, but I also watch a lot of film and television, and I find that a story, you know, a situation like that, they'll just show in the room, getting out, that's the end. What made you decide to show their lives so extensively afterwards?
I'm really glad you asked because, you know, some reviews preferred the first half, some readers preferred the first half, because the first half is easier. It's way simpler, you know. Oh, they're locked up, that's dreadful, and now they're free, that's great. Whereas to me, it would have been really facile to stay at that level, and it also would have implied that the modern world is just grand, and anybody who's let out into it will be happy ever after. And, you know, I thought it would be wasting the perspective of such an outsider child to not have him explore our world and, frankly, find things about it that he doesn't like as much as home. I also wanted the story to be way more universal than just, you know, the story of a freakishly unusual case. I mean, there have been almost no kids who've grown up in a locked room but otherwise unharmed. There have been many children who've been brought up in appallingly confined, neglected and abused ways. Part of my research for Room was to read every case on a website called feralchildren.com, which I can't say I recommend, but I made myself read each of those cases to see what kids can survive and what they can't. So Room is really about a very unusual situation in that he's basically fine even though he's locked up. But I wanted the story to be about all kids and all parents, and how parenthood itself is this little intimate bubble which, for most kids, gradually over the years you loosen the bond and each of you gets a bit more freedom from each other. But in the case of Jack and Ma, it happens overnight. So I wanted, by taking the really unusual storyline of a locked up child, I wanted to look at that completely universal pattern of separation from the parent and how there is freedom in it and there is loss as well. So to me the book is trying to do a lot more than what happens just in the first half. So I always knew it had to be both halves, even though that mightn't fit with the sort of genre conventions of a good story, you know. I always thought as a book in two halves. Yeah, the second half was, I can tell it's sort of less easy for a lot of readers to read because the first half is almost a kind of a coziness that Jack and Ma are so together. But to me, it was really important to actually see what happens when they start getting wrenched apart. One book I learned from, often you can be very influenced by books that don't seem to be like yours. So a book that was a huge influence for me was We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, because again, she takes a totally freakish, you know, a marginal case of a mother whose child goes to school and kills a lot of kids, and she uses it to illuminate everybody's parenting experience, because everybody's had those moments of my child is a monster and nobody can see it but me. So I remember thinking, well, if she could do that with Kevin, then I want to do that with Jack, for those moments everybody's had of, I feel locked in a room with my child, you know. So I think, you know, when I write about freakish cases, it's not just for the sheer fun of freakishness, it's actually because the most extreme case can sometimes really illuminate the everyday experience, you know.
I kind of wish I had that wine glass right there. My question was our other favorite Canadian author is Giles Blunt, and he's written quite a few books that are based on the same character. Do you think that's ever something that you would do, like a series of books featuring the same characters and location?
I never have. I've occasionally done a little repeat visit, like in my first novel, Stir Fried, there's a character. Oh,
you never know, eh?
Anyway, one of the characters is this kind of bad girl student. So then when I was writing a novel called Landing years later, which was set in a very changed Dublin of, you know, money, I decided to make her all grown up, married with a child and working in publicity. So I thought it would be really fun to see how the years had changed and not changed that character. So the occasional repeat visit. I've never done a series, though I do have in mind a children's trilogy. Who knows if I'll be able to do it, because that's a very different form. But I see with my own son at 8, you know, they just have a thing for series, you know. They love that continuity. It's almost the safety of another Captain Underpants title. And although I don't imagine I'll write anything my son would want to read, because, you know, he's very into the farts and squelches, I do think there's something to be said for a series when it comes to kids fiction. Yeah, they almost want a contract with you that once you have made them care about these characters, that more will come.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? I was going to mention just regarding Room, because you said it wasn't a coincidence that you had a 4-year-old son at the same time, though, right?
No, but it's funny. I didn't choose to make Jack that age just because it was handy, because my own son was. I think in a way, my having a son who was 4 at the time is what made me really notice the Fritzl case when I heard about it. You know, I think it really struck a chord with me. But
For
then,
those people who don't know what the
Fritzl case in Austria, when a whole family were found who'd been basically living in a dungeon, Elizabeth Fritzl was kept there by her own father. And she had many children, some of whom he raised upstairs with his wife and some downstairs. So a much more complicated case. But one real child in that case, Felix Fritzl, was 5 at the time. And of course, you know, there was not much access to him by journalists, but somebody said to him, somebody reported that Felix Fritzl said that the world was nice. And I remember thinking, oh, I bet his feelings about the world are a lot more complicated than that. And I bet somebody said to him, the world's nice, isn't it, kid? And he said, yeah. So in a way, that was the comment that stimulated me to write Room. But I think the reason that case mattered to me at all is that I had a small child. But I remember saying to myself, hang on, I mustn't make it a 5-year-old boy just because I've got a boy who's about to turn 5. Should it be a girl? And I decided it really shouldn't, because if you've got a woman and a girl imprisoned by an evil man, the whole thing starts to sound like a really crude feminist fable. And I also decided I wanted Ma and Jack to be different sexes, so in a way they'd be kind of like Adam and Eve making up their own little world, you know? And then I also thought, should the child be younger? Well, no, because then, verbally speaking, the child can't conjure up their whole world. And should the child be older? No, because I really wanted his innocence to be like this bright flame around him. You know, I wanted him not to know what's going on, and so to rely on his mother's, you know, explanation of their world. So it was kind of a wonderful coincidence that my son was just the right age. But God, I paid him a lot of attention that year. I went around with a notebook, you know, like, tell me more about what your Lego's doing. You know? And recently, I was afraid that my own memories of his childhood were getting blurred, because if you've written a book in any way based on your own experience, you remember the book better because you've worked over the sentences more. So some of my teenage memories, for instance, have been erased by the fact that I reworked them in my second novel, Hood. So with Room, I thought, before I forget, I better go through and mark which bits are based on my son. So I went through the yellow highlighter, and there's yellow on every page. Okay. So I owe him big time.
And I think we'll all agree that we owe Emma Donoghue big time for amazing work and for creating totally credible worlds of all kinds, through all kinds of historical periods. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Please go to the back of the room, buy the book, and thank you very much.